Welcome to That Worldview podcast and our very first book review. I'm really excited about this book review. We're going to be talking about religious books, economic books, political books, military books, Middle Eastern history books, Soviet Union history books, and leadership books. I've got about 28 books here that we're going to go through. What I'll probably do is I'm going to read kind of the description. I'll read the description that it shows on Audible, which will kind of give you a good, well-rounded, picture of the book. And then I'm going to go through what I like about the books and things that I learned from the books. I want to do so without giving too much spoilers. But you can't really give away spoilers in these books because none of them are really story books. They're all educational books, history books. So I'm not really worried about that, but I don't know if it happens, I'm sorry. So anyway, we're going to start with the religious books first. So the first book that I'm going to mention is A Shepherd's Look at Psalm 23. It's written by W. Phillip Keller, and here's the summary. Travel the shepherd's path to the green pastures and cool, refreshing waters of Psalm 23. As a shepherd himself, W. Phillip Keller shares his insights into the life and character of sheep and of the Good Shepherd, who loves and cares for them. A shepherd's look at Psalm 23 will give you meaning to the ageless shepherd's psalm, enriching your trust and love for the Lord who watches closely over you. So I'm actually going through this book again right now. I've probably gone through it 3 times. And man, it is such a good book. If you're wondering if God loves you, go read that book. And Psalm 23 is a pretty short chapter. I actually yesterday, as kind of like a meditation exercise, I wrote the whole chapter out, and it's I think 6 verses long. So it's not long at all, but there's so much packed into it. And the author, he was a Middle Eastern shepherd. So this isn't just a guy writing who spent time with shepherds. He was an actual shepherd and had sheep for about 9 years in northern Africa, right near, I think in Egypt somewhere, right near Israel. So he understands shepherding. His dad and I think his grandfather were also shepherds. So he has a really good outlook, and just some of the things are so awesome that he talks about when it comes to shepherding and how the Bible talks about those things as well. So I would highly recommend this book when he talks about just the love of God, how God leads us, how God guides us. He says a couple things in the book that really got to me, and I've thought about this, off and on, and that is, I think it's quite embarrassing how much we are like sheep. It's pretty embarrassing. One of the quick things, I guess, to take away from this book is sheep don't just take care of themselves. They are dependent creatures. If you look at most creatures, most animals, they're pretty self-sufficient, right? They, by the time, right after they're born, they start walking, they start running. Human babies don't do that. They need a lot of nurture and a lot of care. Sheep are a lot the same way. Without a care of a shepherd, they get into trouble. They die quickly. They get eaten, they panic. There's all of these things that sheep do. And if you don't have a good shepherd, the sheep they don't do well at all. And I could go on and on about this book. But anyway, it's a really good book. I would get it. All these books I'm talking about are on Audible, or you can buy them and read them. Next book is Stealing from God by Frank Turk. Stealing from God. Let's see, let me go to the book, sorry. This book in particular is really great because he talks about a lot of atheists will take ideas from God's worldview and use them to try to eliminate God in their worldview. So let me see here. I'm going to read you guys a summary. What if your best reasons to doubt God prove that he exists? In an engaging and memorial way, Stealing from God shows how many atheistic arguments, instead of disproving God, reveal that he actually exists. So this is kind of like a epistemological book, which is how do you know what you know, right? How do you know that God exists? This book kind of goes into logically how God has to exist. And there's one or two other books that I'll kind of mention this idea on. And it's a good book. It's a really good book. Pretty much anyway, it's a good book. I don't know if it's my favorite. There's two other books that I just like the way that, like, for an example, C.S. Lewis approaches it. But this is a very good book. If you're talking with a lot of atheists, if you're going to a secular school in the US or in Europe, this is a really good book to read concerning the reality of God. So that's another really good book. Another good one is The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce. That's kind of a heavy book, but we've all had friends that are either going through or have went through divorces, if your family hasn't been through one already. And divorces are really difficult. Thankfully, I've been blessed to be in a home that has not had a divorce. But this book really kind of pulls out a lot of the side effects of divorce and unhappy marriages and what kind of damage that brings. So if you're going to get married, if you're already married, or you're going through a hard time with your spouse, this is a book that it's a must read, because it really brings to the forefront of view the gravity of divorce and what it does to you, what it does to your kids, what it does to future generations. It really does a good, concise job of showing a lot of evidence for the effects of divorce. The next book on the list is Eternity in Their Hearts. So the next three books I'm going to mention are all by the same author. So there's Eternity in Their Hearts, Lords of the Earth, and Peace Child. These are all written by Don Richardson. And these are probably the best missionary books I have ever read. And I've gone through most of them, I think, more than once. Peace Child is probably one of the most popular books because, anyway, I'm not going to go through all the explanations, and I'm not going to read the descriptions of these ones, but they all tell a little bit different stories, but all kind of in the same area. I think most of them are in Papua New Guinea, and they talk about reaching the hardships of missions and living in the jungle, and even conflict that missionaries, or tensions that missionaries have between each other, and then the things that they learn when trying to reach people groups that are very primitive. This is a bit of a spoiler, but in some of the books, many of the missionaries die, and they give you those explicit details of how it happened. So you've got that, but then you also just see the glory and majesty of God and him showing himself to be powerful and true, and how he moves in the missionaries to understand the culture and then preach the gospel in a way that they understand it and run with it wholeheartedly. So you see that, and there's just so much. I'm like barely scratching the surface. One other thing I got, I believe it was from Lords of the Earth, but there's another book that he talks about in there called The Karen Apostle. And it's about a guy who went to Laos, Burma, Thailand, or he didn't go there. He was a native, but he was a criminal before he got saved. He said he had killed about 30 people before he got saved, because he was just a murderer and a thief. Got saved, had to get over anger issues, started walking with God, and then he was just relentless. He actually, when you read, I read the book, I went and bought it and read it, and the Karen Apostle is, I feel like I'm reading the book of Acts just for the modern man, for modern day. It happened, I believe, I think it was the early 1900s was when he did this work. And this man alone was able to reach millions of people for the gospel in his whole area. And if you do any research of Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, that whole area, or Burma, you'll still see tons of Baptist churches and things all over that area because of American missionaries and nationals that spread the gospel effectively. And, we could talk about effectiveness, and I think they used effective methods there. At least the Karen Apostle definitely used effective methods. Whether we do or not as modern missionaries, we can talk about that in the future. But anyway, that's another really good book that I found out of these missionary books. So go listen to those ones too. The next book is Evidence Not Seen by Darlene Rose. This is a really good book about a missionary lady who, she was married. It's her, obviously just her life story, and it's her getting married and then just what happens to her. This is during the height of World War II. So she's taken by the Japanese who went to Papua New Guinea and took over the land and started doing stuff there. So it's just her heart. It's just the amazing thing God teaches her and does with her in Papua New Guinea as a prisoner of war and as a missionary there. Book is Evidence Not Seen. It's a really good book. I think I'm going to kind of leave off the descriptions. I thought it might be a little bit helpful, but it might be a little bit time consuming. So we'll just keep going. And you can always read these, obviously, on Audible or any other places you want, the descriptions. Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus is another really good book by Nabeel Qureshi. He died of cancer, sadly. I don't remember how many, maybe 6 years ago or more. But he was a Muslim who found Jesus, and Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus is his testimony. And it is probably one of the craziest and best testimonies of a Muslim getting saved you will ever hear. I have some personal friends who got saved, and they have all really amazing stories of how God showed them stuff in dreams. And this is probably one of the most crazy, detailed dreams you'll ever find of God leading someone to Christ in a dream and out of Islam. And another book that he wrote is called No God But One, Allah or Jesus. So the first one is his testimony. The second one is him explaining why Jesus and not Allah and the differences between them. Both very good books, especially if you're going to start witnessing to Muslims. I highly recommend both of these books. The next one, we're going to get into C.S. Lewis. The next two books are by C.S. Lewis. One is called The Great Divorce. I'm listening to this one also right now again. I've gone through it multiple times, and I do have some problems with C.S. Lewis's religious views. For an example, I don't believe at all he believed in eternal security. In some facets, he believed that the Catholic Church was one of the true churches, and there's a couple other things that I think are a little bit fishy. But that's totally fine. I mean, hey, you eat the meat, spit out the bones. But this book, what he is really good at is he's really good at digging into the intents of people's hearts and why they do what they do. And The Great Divorce is probably the best example, as far as I have found so far, of him doing this. Is he will, the kind of the setting of it's a fictional story of, you've got two places. You've got earth or hell. You've got hell, which is like this really dingy, it's a place where you live, but nothing's really real. You imagine it exists, but it's not actually real. It's hard to explain. And then the setting of the story is he goes to the place where these Christian beings are, and everything, he talks about the grass is hard as diamonds and apples are heavy. The waterfalls are loud and painful. And the environment of the Christians is too hard for the unbeliever to bear. But while the unbelievers are there for a small amount of time, they talk to these beings who are like Christians. They're they look like glorified beings in a sense. That's how he describes them in the book. And he's talking to them, and all of these people come from different walks of life, and they all give an excuse why they can't go to heaven, which in the book is like the mountains, going to the Savior in the mountains, why they can't go, and how they're still justified and good, even though they can't follow Christ, how they should still be accepted. It's just, again, a really good book. All of these books, by the way, that I'm talking about, they're all really good books. So don't think that, especially in this, some books I'm no, all of these books I really love. Out of 200 plus books, these 28 are the ones that I really enjoyed. So The Great Divorce is a really good book on that. The Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis as well is a really good book. He talks about, I'll be honest, there's things in this book that is spit out the bones, but he has a really good point about the metaphysics of God, which is the character of God. And he just, from a very logical standpoint, just explains why God has to exist. The reason I like this book is I can't even speak right now, is along the same reasons why I like Frank Turek's book, Stealing from God. Same concept. So if you're looking to understand why God has to exist on a logical level and a spiritual level, Mere Christianity and Lords of the Earth are two books I would highly recommend. The last book in the religious books that I'm going to mention is Shepherds for Sale by Megan Bashem. Now, this book is a much newer book, but it talks about how the woke ideology and leftist ideology has crept into the evangelical world. Now, I know for me as a Baptist and for other Baptists, this isn't really like a big deal necessarily, as far as I can tell, because we don't have Baptists going gay or, doing all this other crazy stuff. But when it comes to the majority of Christians in America, which I think are actually saved, a lot of them, they believe the gospel, they're evangelical. And this book really applies to them and a lot of like big churches. Big churches are very susceptible to this kind of manipulation. That's a really good book if you want to understand more like modern corruption in politics and in churches in today's era. So anyway, as far as religious books, that's that. Next, we'll get into economic and political books. So, man, it kind of depends how far down the rabbit trail you want to go. I go pretty far. And as a side note, I'm actually thinking about maybe starting some sort of like I don't even know what to call it, like an underground podcast where I give some of my more unpopular views. And there's different reasons why I have to do that. Not because I'm scared or anything of people knowing my views. I'm really not at all scared of that. But because of the capacity of some of the work that I'm doing now with IMSI and things of that nature and working with different countries, I kind of have to be very careful what I say in a very public way. And I'm just trying to find that balance. And so I'm thinking about starting maybe like some sort of Telegram feed or something where I talk about some of this stuff. And not because anything that I'm saying is, never heard before, but if I say it in a very public capacity, it may or may not keep me out of certain countries. And that's why. That's why I'm hesitant to mention a lot of things. But anyway, the first book is The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. This is a very fascinating book. So it's a true story about John Perkins, the author, who he worked for some extremely large companies. Excuse me. And what he would do is they would go into countries. He talks a lot about South American countries that they would do this in. Is they would go into a country and they would want to give the country a massive loan of maybe a couple $1 billion, right? And what they would do is they would send a team in with John Perkins and they would look at their infrastructure. They would look at their schools, their roads, things of that nature. And they would say, okay, based upon what you have now and based upon what we would offer. So what they would say is we'll give you like, a multi-billion-dollar loan to repair your roads, to build new infrastructure, to bring more electricity into your country, to build schools, to build town centers, right? All of this stuff for population growth and things of that nature. We believe if you take our loan and let us build these things in your country, that you will have, say a projected growth of 0.7 per year, right? Which means, and then what they do is try to justify the loan to them. Like, hey, you can afford this loan is the idea. But what they would do is they would send these projection teams in to project the economic growth over time, and they would inflate all the numbers. So then what would happen is they would present these numbers to the country. The country would say, oh yeah, we like it. Go ahead. We'll take the loan of several $1 billion to build all this infrastructure. And they would build the infrastructure, and then their growth rate wouldn't grow to the same degree as was projected. And so they couldn't keep up the loan payments to other countries like America or big oil companies or whatnot. And these countries would have to default on some of their payments. And that would actually put these countries under the thumb of another country saying, well, if you don't do this and this and this for us, we're going to call in your loans that you can't pay off. And that's pretty much his whole story. I tell you what, truth is stranger than fiction in a lot of ways. And this book kind of brings a lot of those things out. So if you're interested in economics or politics, keep your ears up. This book is one of the best books on understanding corrupt economics and how to, manipulate countries. The next book is Prisoner of Geography by Tim Marshall. So this book is about how geography affects our politics. And he goes and he talks about mountain regions throughout the world, oceans, and the trade routes throughout the whole world, and how trade routes and mountain ranges and stuff affect how we do trade and to what countries we do trade with. It's just such an interesting book. And I think for if you're also wanting to do missions, this is a very good book to read as well, because it teaches you how to work within the geography of the country you're working in and how to be effective. I think maybe when it comes to meeting with people, this is a big deal. When it comes to, because technology has gone so far, when it comes to movement of information, geography doesn't really geography, unless it's local tech, like handheld, ham radios or some sort of, radio like that, really geography doesn't stop the movement of information anymore. That's definitely true. It did back in the day because every information that was moved had to be moved by people, and people were limited by geography and mountain ranges and things of that nature. But as far as this is just a good book to listen to when it talks about how economics works around geography and how missions might work around geography. The next book is The Creature from Jekyll Island. So the next two books I'm going to mention are like pretty big books. The Creature from Jekyll Island, written by Edward Griffin, is a very sobering book because The Creature from Jekyll Island is the Federal Reserve. So Jekyll Island was an island several billionaires went to back in the day. I read this book a couple years ago, and I've refreshed every so often on some of the material, but I'm forgetting some stuff. But this, I think it was the early 1900s that the Federal Reserve came into play. And it talks about just the absolute corruption. They talk about how money works in wars, how money works, what a fiat currency is, how the gold standard works. They talk about fractional reserve banking. They talk about the nature of money, how money works, how we would restore our financial money systems, how our system now is a debt system. So a lot of things that I'm saying may not make sense to a lot of people, but I would highly recommend this book to any man, because if you want to be well-rounded on how the world works and how you should move politically, this book and these two books have a ton to do with those things. So I'm going to guilt trip men and women a little bit, but if you want to be diligent, good citizens and Christians, read these books. Actually, I'd say that to all of these books. Some of them are more niche. Like, I don't actually think that for all of these, but most of these books, that should be true. That's a very good book. And it talks about more than just money, and it talks about more than just the Federal Reserve, but it talks about how the Federal Reserve moved politically and how it just put the American system in bondage in many, many ways. The next book is called The $1 Trillion Conspiracy, the unabridged version by Jim Marrs. This book pretty much talks about the same thing, but like a wider scope. It mentions a little bit more details, and it's a very good book. Obviously, that's why I'm mentioning it, but it pretty much talks about the exact same thing as like the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking and wars, and but it goes into more detail on a couple broader terms, which are really cool. The next book is called The Law by Frederick Bastiat. This is a really good book. It's a very small book, but this was my introduction to understanding the nature of law, understanding the nature of how law works. There's just and unjust law. There's legal plunder and illegal plunder. It talks about the nature of the lawmaker. And it's just a really good book in understanding even how our Constitution works, how different things work in our political realm, and how people get away with things in a legal sense, but it's an immoral sense. They get away with it in a legal way, but it's an immoral thing, right? And this book kind of explains a lot of those things. Really, really good book. I would highly recommend this book for anyone interested in going into law, or just any high schoolers should read this book. It's a great book. It's an easy read. It's a small read. Read it. Okay, so these other books I'm going to start mentioning are more niche. It's because of the things that I have studied and things that I kind of have a passion for studying. The first one is called The Gulag Archipelago, 1918 to 1956 by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Now, I've really loved studying Soviet history, and I think God gave me that for a reason. But these books, oh man, I tell you what, if you're not on the edge of crying at certain times of these books, like there's something wrong with you. I will say this off the bat, the Soviet Union was the worst thing to happen in modern history. It's probably been, other than the massacres and genocides in China, it is the largest massacre of all time. The Soviet Union killed, between these two time periods, and even a little bit past, up to the 70s, killed around 100 million people. Hitler just paled in comparison. Like, people think of Hitler as the bad guy in a lot of senses. Hitler was a miniature man, in a very large sense. Yes, he did things that I don't think were right, but if you want to condemn anybody, it's the Soviet Union. And woe to America for allying with them in World War II. We actually put ourselves in Europe in much greater bondage by allying with the Soviet Union. And it's heavy stuff. But there's some really cool things about Christians in there and stuff of that nature, but it just goes through what actually happened in the Soviet Union during this time and a lot of the history of it. And I tell you what, man, the Soviet Union and communism is very much alive today in the U.S. and in other countries. So that's another reason why I think it's a much, much, much greater threat than anything Hitler could have even slightly posed. The next book is One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, also written by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. This book the title is kind of self-explanatory. It walks you through one day of his life in the gulags as a labor prisoner. And this book is actually really cool because he actually mentions Baptists and Christians that, he says in one part of the book, camp life, gulag life, for some reason never phased or got to the Christians and the Baptists. He's like, for some reason they had this incredible ability to be joyful and happy among the tortures and beatings and absolute horrible conditions. Much, much, much worse than even, Auschwitz and things of that nature. And so they and how they could be so happy and just helpful to other people. So that's a very interesting book in that sense as well. The last book talking about the Soviet Union and stuff like that is called Soviet Stan. And it's written by Erica Fatland, and she goes through a lot of the northern Asian countries like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, a lot of these Stan countries that are right below Russia, and how the Soviet Union affected a lot of these countries and how it still affects them to this day. I believe Turkmenistan is still a complete and total, why am I blanking? It's still run off of a very, very strong, iron-handed dictator. And it's kind of like North Korea. But you don't really hear much of this country, but it's pretty, pretty bad. Anyway, so that's another really good book to see how the Soviet Union affected these countries. And for an example, there's a lot of towns in Kazakhstan that are they're literally like cancer-ridden towns because they did a lot of their nuclear, all of Russia's or the Soviet Union. I do make a difference between the two. A lot of the testing of the Soviet Union happened in Kazakhstan. And they didn't really take care of their people or nothing. There was no shielding from radiation. And so there's so many people there that the average lifespan is like 30 or 40 because of the nuclear testing that they did in Kazakhstan. Anyway, okay, so the next, it's kind of the same thread, but a little bit different. The next series of books is military books and history, Middle Eastern history books. The first one is Black Flags by Joby Warwick, and it's the history of ISIS. and how ISIS kind of came to be, and something that might not be necessarily, popular opinion, but there's lots of evidence for it. Really, America created a lot of these terrorist organizations through different funding and different things that the CIA did. It's I don't want to go as far as to say that we very explicitly created them, but quite frankly, you have to be an absolute moron, an idiot, to think that this wouldn't create terrorism. But hence the world is an evil place, and here we are. But Black Flags talks about the kind of the start of ISIS and where it got its roots and how it became popular and things of that nature in the Middle East. Another book is Invisible Nation by Quill Lawrence, and this is about oh my goodness, why am I blanking? Heavens, hang on, I'm looking something up on my iPhone. I can't believe I'm blanking so bad. Okay. I gotta find this book. Kurdish. Oh my goodness. So this book talks about the Kurdish people. So northern Iraq is Kurdish. And like Erbil and north of that, a lot of that is all Kurdish. And and it talks about the politics of the US and Turkey and things of that nature when dealing with the Kurds and things that they suffered and things that they went through. They had a lot of people die because, so brief history, during Bush's era, George Bush Jr., we kind of tried to make like a safe haven for the Kurds up when they were trying to go north into Turkey, and Turkey wouldn't let them in. And so we kind of tried to make a safe haven for them and made a no-fly zone over them for a long time over northern Iraq. And because we kind of gave the safe haven to Kurds, a lot of terrorist groups were attracted to that area because it was an area where they could secretly be safe. And so anyway, that's another reason why there's been so much conflict in that area as well. It's a good book if you're looking for, I guess, modern Middle Eastern history of politics and terrorism. Okay, the next couple books are on military. I am a huge military buff guy. I've read and listened to so many books on the history of special force groups, SOS, Delta, Green Berets, MARSOC, Navy SEALs, even some African fighting forces. I've kind of done some research on some of them as well, and I just enjoy it. I just do. And so the first book is Delta Force by Charlie Beckwith and Ronald Knox. Now, Beckwith was the guy who kind of came up with the idea for Delta Force after he saw what was going on and how well the SAS worked. So it's just a really good book. If you're into this kind of stuff, they're just great books. But it gives you the history of Delta Force. Great book. The next book is Inside Delta Force by Command Sergeant Major Eric Hanley. And so the first book is how Delta Force started and how they wanted to pattern Delta Force. And then this book is the inner workings of Delta Force and just the operations of it. The next book is On Combat. So these next two books are actually mandatory reading for all SF or Special Forces personnel, at least last I checked. The first one is called On Combat and On Killing. Both of them are written by Dave Grossman, and On Combat was also written by Lauren Chestenson. So these books are really interesting because they talk about the psychology of war, the psychology of what it takes to kill somebody, who would and would not kill someone, the effects of war, the effects of PTSD and how to handle killing in combat, and actually how avertive people are to killing. In World War II, I think only 20% were actually willing to shoot the enemy, and it got really bad in Vietnam. I think only 10% were actually willing to shoot at the enemy. Most soldiers, well, they had a very bad problem of guns getting jammed in the Vietnam War as well with certain guns. But there was a lot of men that they would just blindly shoot because they were actually kind of afraid. They just didn't want to kill somebody. And so they talk about they talk about these things and why it's that way, and how to, quite frankly, how to handle war and still stay human, and how to process grief and killing and shock and all that other stuff. So I think we've got some pretty hard times coming throughout different parts of the world. So it might be a good book for some people to read. It's just good to know how to handle those things, because if you ever find yourself in a country that has conflict and you find yourself in a really bad situation, some of these things may actually help you. Okay, so as far as war books, I only have 2 books left, and they're leadership books. One of them I'm reading right now for the first time. It's called It's Our Ship by Michael Abershoff. Man, by D. Michael Abershoff. It's such a great book. I'm not even done with it yet. I'm over halfway through it, and I'm already going to recommend it. It's already helped me in understanding how I want to do things, how I want to communicate as a follower and as a leader, how I want to be proactive in making things very easy for the people I'm working with, and how to help people grow. It's probably my top book for leadership so far, and I'm not even done with the book yet. That's how much I like it. So every man should read that book, because every man should be a leader in some capacity. Women too, but you get what I'm saying. The last book is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, which a lot of you probably already know about. It's a very popular leadership book, and it's a very good book. He wrote a couple other books. I don't remember the titles of those, but this is the one that I read and liked the most. I read, I think, the other 2. I read one completely, the other one completely, and then one I only read partially. But that's a very good book as well on leadership. So that's all the books that I have for today. If you guys have any questions, or different things that you want to talk about these books, or have objections, hey, let me know. I'm totally down to talk about these things. For any of you who know me, if it's a subject I like, I got to be careful, because I can just talk people's ear off. It's just sadly how I am, and I got to work on that. But I tell you what, read books. Leaders are readers. It sounds super cliche, but it's very true. If you don't know how to lead, if you don't know how to grow, if you don't have information to work with, you're just not going to lead very well in any capacity. So if you guys have other books you would like me to read, or you want me to maybe do more on, let me know. Suggest books. Thanks for everything you guys are doing and listening to the podcast. I've really, really been thankful. I feel like our Instagram page is taking a bit of a slump, but that's okay. But things are going really well. God's got some really amazing things happening in the ministry that I'm working with now. And thanks for listening, guys. And again, let me know if you want more book reviews, if you want other, just whatever other content you want, just let me know. So stay tuned. Thanks for listening, everybody. And keep your heads on straight. Keep your head on a swivel. I will see you guys next time on the podcast. God bless.